They laughed at me in front of everyone. At my own brother's engagement, I was treated like a nobody. If only they knew. I was the owner of the company they worked for. They laughed at me in front of everyone. At my own brother's engagement, I was treated like a nobody. If only they knew. I was the owner of the company they worked for. The hall was glowing with lights, flowers, and celebration, but I felt invisible the moment I stepped inside. People moved past me without a second glance, their eyes trained on expensive clothes, confident smiles, and loud laughter. I stood there quietly, holding my small gift bag, reminding myself that I was here for my brother, not for them. This was supposed to be a happy day. My younger brother, the one I had helped raise after our parents passed away, was starting a new chapter of his life. I had helped pay for this engagement, arrange the venue through contacts, and even approved time off for some employees so they could attend. Yet there I was, standing alone near the back, as if I were an outsider who had wandered in by mistake. I noticed the first laugh when I walked past a group of well-dressed guests. It was subtle at first, quick glances at my simple outfit, a whisper followed by a smirk. I pretended not to notice, the way I had learned to do years ago. Silence had become my armor, and patience my strongest weapon. Then came the comments. "Is she from the bride's side or the groom's?" Someone asked loudly. "She must be a distant relative," another replied, laughing. "Look at her." I felt the heat rise in my chest, but I kept my face calm. I had worn this same calm expression in meetings worth millions, across long tables filled with powerful men who underestimated me the moment I entered the room. Compared to that, this was nothing, or so I told myself. My brother caught my eye from across the hall. For a moment, his smile faded, replaced by concern. He knew me. He knew that silence meant I was holding something back. I gave him a small nod, silently telling him not to worry, even though my heart felt heavier with every passing second. As the engagement ceremony began, I took a seat at the edge of the gathering. That's when the real mocking started. My brother's future in-laws sat just a few rows ahead of me. They spoke openly, without shame, as if I were too insignificant to understand. "She doesn't look very successful," one of the men said, shaking his head. "Yes," another replied, "probably unemployed or doing some small job." They laughed, comfortably, confidently, like people who had never been challenged in their lives. I looked at the floor not because I felt small, but because I didn't trust myself to look at them yet. That same man, with the gold watch and proud smile, had stood nervously in my office just days ago, waiting for my approval on a project proposal. He had praised my leadership then. Now he didn't even recognize me. The irony almost made me smile. The woman next to him leaned forward and whispered something cruel about my appearance, loud enough for others to hear. A few heads turned toward me, curious, judging, entertained. I felt every stare like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. In moments like this, people assume silence means defeat. They believe that the quiet ones are weak, that power always announces itself loudly. What they don't understand is that real power doesn't need attention. It waits. I reminded myself why I stayed quiet. I hadn't built my company by reacting emotionally. I had built it by observing, listening, and choosing the right moment to act. And this was not yet the moment. As the engagement ring was placed on the bride's finger, applause filled the hall. Everyone stood. I stood too, clapping softly, my thoughts far away. I wondered how easily people judged worth by appearance, how quickly respect disappeared when they thought no benefit could come from offering it. Someone behind me whispered, "She looks uncomfortable. Why did they even invite her?" That question cut deeper than the laughter. I took a slow breath and reminded myself of the journey that brought me here, the nights I slept in my office, the deals I fought for, the employees whose livelihoods depended on decisions I made every single day. None of that showed on my clothes, none of it announced itself in my posture, and that was exactly why they felt safe mocking me. Across the room, a man in a tailored suit glanced at me again, longer this time. His brows furrowed slightly, as if something about me felt familiar. I noticed his reaction and felt a quiet shift inside me. Recognition was close, very close. The laughter continued, the judgments grew bolder, and the room buzzed with careless confidence. They thought they knew who I was. They had no idea that this was only the beginning, and that the truth, when it arrived, would shake every smile in that hall. The laughter didn't stop after the ceremony. It grew louder. Once the formalities ended, people relaxed, and with that comfort came cruelty. Groups formed around tables, glasses clinked, and conversations turned sharper, more personal. I stayed seated where I was, watching the room the way I always did, quietly, carefully. Years of running a company had trained me to read people, to notice what they said when they thought no one important was listening. That's when I heard my name, not spoken kindly, not spoken with respect, spoken like a joke passed around for entertainment. One of the bride's relatives leaned back in his chair and said, "So, who exactly is she? The quiet one sitting alone?" Another replied with a chuckle, "Probably one of those people who pretend they're successful." They laughed again. I felt a familiar tightening in my chest, not anger, not sadness, but recognition. I had been here before, in conference rooms where men assumed I was an assistant, in negotiations where my silence was mistaken for ignorance. Every time the pattern was the same: underestimate first, regret later. Someone across the table gestured in my direction. "She hasn't said a word all evening." That tells you everything. I wanted to ask him how many words it took to build a company from nothing. I wanted to ask how many nights of doubt, how many risks, how many people depending on your decisions it took before silence became your safest choice. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. The man with the gold watch, the same one who had mocked my appearance earlier, stood up to refill his drink. As he passed by my table, he glanced at me again briefly. His eyes lingered just a second longer this time, as if something about my face bothered him. I knew that look. That was the look of someone standing, at the edge of remembering something important. He turned back to his group and laughed loudly. "Honestly," he said, "people like her should be grateful just to attend events like this. Look around, this is what success looks like." His friends nodded in agreement, proudly adjusting their suits, talking about their positions, their salaries, their companies. Names were dropped casually, like trophies placed on the table. I recognized every single one of those companies, because they all belonged to me. One of the men bragged about a recent promotion. "Our company is expanding fast," he said. "New leadership, big vision. You need talent to survive there." I almost smiled. That new leadership was me. I remembered his interview clearly. He had sat across from me, nervous, rehearsed, eager to impress. He had spoken about loyalty, teamwork, respect. Now he sat just a few feet away, mocking someone he thought had no value. The contrast was almost painful. A woman leaned toward him and whispered something, then looked directly at me and laughed. "Some people just don't have ambition," she said loudly. "You can see it in how they carry themselves." I met her eyes for the first time. She looked away immediately. That moment told me everything. They weren't laughing because they were confident. They were laughing because confidence needs an audience, and they believed I was harmless enough to use as one. The engagement hall buzzed with careless joy, but inside me something shifted. Not rage, not revenge, clarity. I realized this wasn't just about me being mocked. It was about how easily people decided who deserved respect and who didn't. How quickly they judged worth by clothes, volume, and arrogance. My brother approached me quietly and sat beside me. "Are you okay?" he asked under his breath. I nodded. "I'm fine." He looked unconvinced. He had grown up watching me carry burdens silently. He knew that when I said I'm fine, it meant I was calculating something carefully. "I can say something," he offered. "You don't have to take this." I shook my head gently. "Not yet," because I needed them comfortable. I needed them careless. Across the room, the gold watchman raised his glass. "To success," he announced proudly. "To hard work and knowing your place in the world." Applause followed. Knowing your place. I repeated those words in my mind slowly. For years, I had learned my place, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments when my decisions affected hundreds of lives. My place wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it didn't need validation. But tonight, they had assigned me a place without knowing who I was, and that was their mistake. Dinner was announced, and people began moving toward the buffet. As I stood, someone bumped into me lightly and muttered, "Sorry, Without looking up, I stepped aside, allowing others to pass, listening as conversations drifted around me. She doesn't look like management material. Pro? Babely depends on someone else to survive. Some people are just background characters. Each comment landed not as an insult but as evidence of how blind arrogance could be. As I filled my plate, I noticed a man near the end of the line staring at me intently. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't talking. He looked unsettled. His eyes flicked from my face to my hands, then back again. He knew. I recognized him immediately. One of the senior managers from my company. He had joined only a few months ago. He had seen me in meetings, heard my voice give direction, watched others fall silent when I spoke. His grip tightened on his plate. Our eyes met. His face went pale. He looked away quickly, but it was too late. The shift had begun. He leaned toward the gold watchman and whispered something urgently. The man frowned, shook his head, and laughed it off. "You're imagining things," he said. "She's nobody. The senior manager swallowed hard. I could see panic flicker behind his eyes. He looked back at me once more, then down at the floor. He knew exactly who I was, and he knew what this situation meant. The laughter around the table started to feel strained. Not everyone noticed it yet, but I did. Confidence was cracking. Certainty was slipping. I returned to my seat calmly, setting my plate down as if nothing had changed. Inside, I felt the quiet certainty of a moment approaching its turning point. They had spent the evening telling me who I was. Soon, they would have to listen. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't be shouted. It would be spoken calmly, just like I had been all night. When I stepped back into the hall, the noise didn't return to normal. Conversations resumed, but they were quieter now, more cautious. It was the kind of quiet that follows uncertainty, the kind people don't notice until it's already settled in. I walked back to my seat, aware that eyes followed me, not openly, but from the corners of the room. Something had shifted while I was gone. The senior manager stood near the drinks table, pretending to check his phone. His shoulders were tense, his posture stiff. He wasn't relaxed anymore. He looked like someone waiting for consequences. As I sat down, a man from another table leaned toward the gold watchman and whispered something urgently. I didn't need to hear the words to understand the tone. Curiosity had turned into suspicion. The gold watchman frowned and glanced at me again, longer this time. His smile faded just slightly, replaced by irritation. "What?" he asked, laughing it off. "You're all acting strange." No one answered him directly. Dinner plates were being cleared now, and someone announced that it was time for speeches. Chairs shifted. People turned their attention toward the small stage near the front. The change in focus gave the room a temporary sense of order, but the tension remained, thick and restless. My brother was asked to say a few words. He stood confidently, smiling, thanking everyone for being there. As he spoke, his eyes flicked toward me once or twice. I could tell he was grounding himself, reminding himself why this night mattered. Applause followed his speech, polite and warm. Then the bride's uncle was invited to speak, the gold watchman. He straightened his jacket, clearly pleased with himself, and walked toward the stage. This was his moment, another chance to command attention, to be admired. He cleared his throat. "Family, friends," he began, smiling broadly. "Tonight is about new beginnings, success, and unity." Success? The word again. As he spoke, his confidence returned, but only on the surface. Underneath, something was off. His eyes kept drifting toward my table, as if checking whether I was still there. He joked about hard work, about building careers, about how important it was to know your worth. The crowd laughed politely, but the laughter felt thin now. People were distracted, listening but not fully present. I noticed the senior manager lower his head, rubbing his temples. He looked trapped between two impossible choices: speak now and cause chaos, or stay silent and let the damage deepen. The gold watchman raised his glass. "To knowing who you are," he said proudly. The irony was almost unbearable. As he stepped down from the stage, applause filled the room again, but it lacked enthusiasm. He returned to his table, satisfied, unaware that his confidence was built on a lie he didn't know he was living in. The host then announced, "If anyone else would like to share a few words, you're welcome." The room hesitated. For a moment, no one moved. Then, unexpectedly, the senior manager stood up. Every head turned. He adjusted his tie, his face pale, and cleared his throat. I wasn't planning to speak," he said carefully, "but I feel it's important." The gold watchman stared at him, confused. "What are you doing?" he whispered sharply. The senior manager ignored him. "I just want to say," he continued, choosing each word slowly, "that tonight reminds us not to judge people too quickly. Sometimes the quiet ones carry more responsibility than we realize." A ripple of confusion spread across the room. People glanced at me. The gold watchman laughed nervously. "What are you talking about?" he said. "This is an engagement, not a lecture." The senior manager swallowed hard. "I know," he replied, "but respect matters, especially when you don't know who you're speaking to." The room went silent. The host shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to interrupt. The senior manager stepped back, his hands shaking slightly, as if he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. Whispers erupted immediately. "What was that about? Did you see his face? Who was he referring to?" I felt the weight of attention settle on me again, heavier than before. My brother looked stunned. The gold watchman leaned toward the senior manager, his voice low and sharp. "Explain yourself," he hissed. The senior manager didn't answer. Instead, he looked at me. That single glance did more than words ever could. I stood up slowly. Chairs creaked. Conversations stopped. The sound system hummed faintly in the background, suddenly too loud. "I think," I said calmly, "this evening has been very revealing." My voice carried farther than I expected. The host froze. The gold watchman's smile disappeared completely. "I didn't come here to speak," I continued. "I came here to celebrate my brother. But it seems there's some confusion in the room." The silence was absolute now. Every person felt it, the moment balanced on a knife's edge, seconds away from changing everything. I paused, looking around the hall, meeting faces that had laughed at me earlier, faces that now held uncertainty, fear, and curiosity. "I believe," I said softly, "it's time that confusion was addressed." And with that, the night crossed the point of no return. The air in the hall had shifted entirely. It was no longer the festive, carefree atmosphere of an engagement celebration. Something deeper, heavier, and unspoken had settled over the room, an undercurrent of unease that pulsed in the pauses between words, in the half-smiles that no longer reached the eyes, in the nervous clearing of throats. The laughter that once felt effortless now felt strained, like performers fumbling through a script they didn't fully understand. I walked slowly through the room, each step measured, deliberate. People's heads turned toward me as I moved, not all at once, not dramatica, but with the subtle attentiveness of those who sense a storm approaching. The senior manager, who had already flinched once at recognizing me, shifted nervously in his seat. His hands were clasped tightly together, the knuckles white from the tension. He was aware now, fully aware, of who I was, and I could feel the silent panic emanating from him, seeping into the table around him. The gold watchman, who had spent the entire evening basking in the confidence of his own arrogance, caught my gaze as I passed. For the first time, I saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It was brief, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to let me know that the carefully constructed walls of superiority they had built around themselves were beginning to crack. I returned to my table, setting my hands lightly on the surface as if to anchor myself. I didn't rush. I didn't force their attention. But the room followed, as though gravity itself had shifted to my side. The quiet power of someone who has built an empire, someone who commands respect simply through presence, is subtle but undeniable. The senior manager stood up again, this time with more resolve. He had tasted the beginning of truth, and he could no longer hold himself back. His voice trembled slightly as he cleared his throat, but the tremor carried authority. I need to clarify something," he said, glancing toward the gold watchman. "Perhaps some of you are unaware." Whispers erupted immediately around the room. Guests exchanged confused glances. Some tried to dismiss it, telling themselves that he must be exaggerating, imagining things. But the truth was beginning to manifest, undeniable and heavy. The gold watchman's face tightened. His jaw clenched, and the confident mask he had worn so comfortably all evening began to crumble. He leaned toward the senior manager, whispering sharply, "What are you talking about? Stop this, we're here to celebrate, not—" But the manager ignored him. He was no longer speaking to the crowd. He was speaking to the reality that had been invisible to them for years, a reality they were about to confront in the most direct, undeniable way. The room went quiet again, the anticipation thick enough to choke on. Every whisper died mid-sentence. Conversations faltered. The host glanced around nervously, uncertain whether to intervene or let the situation unfold. I felt my brother's hand brush mine briefly. He looked at me with concern, with that familiar worry only a sibling can have. But I simply nodded at him. I was ready. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment when patience, strategy, and silence would pay off. The gold watchman straightened his jacket, trying desperately to reclaim control, to summon the charisma that had carried him through years of overconfidence. But it was too late. His audience, his peers, even his allies had begun to notice something he could no longer dictate. I rose from my chair, letting my movement speak before my words ever did. The room seemed to hold its breath. Chairs creaked under the weight of shifting bodies. Plates were set down, forgotten. Eyes were on me, though some dared not meet mine directly. "I've been quiet all evening," I began, my voice calm, steady, and carrying a weight that commanded attention. "I've listened, I've watched, I've observed. And now it seems necessary to clarify a few misunderstandings." A faint murmur ran through the room, quickly silenced as people realized that I wasn't joking, that this wasn't casual banter. There was a gravity to my tone that drew every ear, every gaze, every flicker of attention toward me. The gold watchman's smile faltered. He looked around the room, perhaps hoping someone would intervene, perhaps hoping at denial could save him. But there was no intervention. The room waited. Everyone was aware that this moment was important, pivotal, life-altering in a subtle but profound way. "I've heard the comments," I continued, my eyes sweeping the hall slowly, methodically, ensuring that every person who had laughed, whispered, or judged could feel the weight of my gaze. "About who I am, about what I do, about my place in this room, and the value I supposedly carry, or lack thereof." Silence. Complete, tense, and expectant. The senior manager shifted slightly, an almost imperceptible nod acknowledging that he understood what was coming, that the truth was about to be unveiled. He glanced toward the gold watchman again, his face pale with anticipation, and the briefest flash of fear crossed the man's expression. I continued, my voice measured, deliberate. "It's fascinating, really, how quickly people assign worth, how quickly they decide who matters and who doesn't, how easily arrogance convinces itself that mockery is justified when it believes no one in the room holds power it cannot see." A faint whisper, then another spread across the hall. Guests began looking at one another, sensing that this was more than a simple correction. Something significant was unfolding. Their curiosity was mixing with dread, the exact emotion I wanted to cultivate. "Some of you," I said, letting my gaze land briefly on the gold watchman, "have been very vocal tonight. You have spoken freely about success, about authority, about who belongs and who does not. And in that freedom, perhaps you forgot." I paused, letting the tension swell. Each second stretched longer than the last. Every guest was leaning in, holding their breath, feeling the pull of suspense so thick it almost pressed against their chests. That success is not always visible. Authority does not always announce itself in loud voices, in tailored suits, or in the applause of the uninformed. Murmurs started again, smaller this time, uncertain. Some guests whispered questions. What does she mean? Who is she talking about? Is she serious? I stepped closer to the center of the room, my calm composure a stark contrast to the agitation building among those who had mocked me earlier. I allowed my gaze to meet theirs one by one. Each blink, each slight shift of expression told me how deeply the reality was penetrating. The gold watchman's fingers tapped nervously on the table. His jaw worked. For the first time, he looked unsure of himself. The senior manager stood frozen, a silent accomplice to the truth that had been building all evening, waiting for the right moment. I smiled gently, soft but commanding. "It's remarkable, really." how comfortable people are when they believe they know the entire story, how confident they feel when they assume they can judge someone based solely on appearances, assumptions, and surface-level observations. Another pause. The room hung in absolute anticipation. My words weren't loud, but their weight was undeniable. Every whisper ceased. Every eye followed me. And yet, I continued, lowering my voice slightly so that people had to lean in, all the assumptions, all the judgments, all the arrogance, none of it prepared you for the truth. I could feel the subtle shivers of realization ripple through the hall. The gold watchman swallowed hard, his face lost color. Guests were exchanging glances, whispering urgently to one another. The senior manager exhaled, his tension visible, his eyes never leaving me. "I understand," I said softly, almost conversationally, "that this might be difficult to grasp, perhaps even humiliating. But the truth, once revealed, is often uncomfortable for those who assumed it could never reach them." I let my gas rest on the senior manager briefly. His hands twitched slightly, betraying his inner turmoil. He knew what was coming, knew the exposure was imminent, and yet there was nothing he could do to stop it. "And so," I said, stepping closer to the center of the hall, "I will give you the clarity you seem to crave. But be warned, once it is known, it cannot be undone. Once the truth is seen, it cannot be unseen. Tonight the stories told about who I am, about my worth, about my place in this room, will all change, permanently." The room went dead silent, not a whisper, not a cough, not even the faintest sound of the engagement music. Every person was suspended in the moment, the tension electric. The gold watchman's confidence had completely evaporated. His smirk was gone. Fear replaced arrogance. I paused, letting the suspense swell to its maximum. My brother's eyes met mine again. A small, almost imperceptible nod passed between us. He understood that the time had come. I looked around the hall once more, letting every eye meet mine in turn. Every person could feel the weight of the moment, could sense the revelation hanging in the air, ready to strike. And then, with perfect calm, I prepared to speak the words that would change everything. The moment had arrived. Every second of observation, every quiet calculation, every patient pause had led to this. The hall, once filled with careless laughter and confident arrogance, now held a silence so heavy it felt almost tangible. You could hear it in the subtle shuffling of feet, the faint clinking of glasses, the nervous clearing of throats. Every gaze was on me. Some filled with curiosity, some with dread, some with the desperate hope that perhaps I would spare them the truth. But there would be no sparing tonight. I took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the calmness settle over me. My brother stood beside me, his eyes wide, a mixture of pride and disbelief reflected in them. He had always known that I was capable of far more than anyone gave me credit for, but even he couldn't have anticipated how tonight would unfold. "I have been quiet all evening," I began, my voice steady, deliberate, and commanding. "I have watched as assumptions were made, as judgments were cast, as laughter was thrown carelessly in the air without thought for the consequences. I have listened to words that were sharp, mocking, and cruel. And I have understood one simple truth. People are comfortable when they believe they know everything about someone, when they feel superior, when they assume no one else holds the power they cannot see." Every eye in the room was locked on me. Even the gold watchman, who had been the loudest in his ridicule, was frozen. His smug expression had vanished entirely, replaced by unease. The senior manager, the one who had recognized me days earlier, was standing rigid, as if bracing himself for what was about to unfold. "And so," I continued, stepping slightly closer to the center of the hall, letting the weight of every word sink in, "it is only fair that the truth be known, that the assumptions, the mockery, the arrogance be confronted with reality." A murmur spread through the room, soft at first, then growing. People were beginning to sense that what was coming would be extraordinary, their curiosity mixed with fear, creating a tension that was almost palpable. The gold watchman looked around, perhaps hoping someone would intervene, perhaps hoping the room would somehow protect him from the reality he had ignored for too long. But no one did. Everyone waited. "I am not who you think I am," I said, my voice unwavering. "I am not merely a guest here, someone to be judged or laughed at. I am not insignificant." Heads turned sharply. The whispers grew, but no one spoke. "Key out loud." Something in my tone, the calm precision of it, made it impossible to interrupt. "I am the owner," I said, pausing just enough for the words to sink, letting the tension stretch painfully. "I own the company where many of you work. Every position you hold, every paycheck you receive, every project you consider vital, you owe in part to me. And tonight, you laughed at me, mocked me, treated me as though I were beneath your notice." The silence became deafening. People's mouths opened, closed. Some tried to speak, but no words formed. The gold watchman's hands gripped the edge of the table. The senior manager's eyes were wide, unblinking, the weight of recognition washing over him in waves. "I hope," I continued, letting a soft, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips, "that the irony is not lost on anyone, that the people who thought themselves powerful, who judged others lightly, who claimed authority over me, they were merely participants in the empire I built, unaware of its true leadership." A few guests gasped audibly. Some leaned closer, trying to process what they had just heard. Their previous confidence was collapsing like a house of cards. Arrogance, once so comfortable and bold, now appeared fragile, ridiculous even. The gold watchman finally found his voice, trembling slightly. What? How you?" I held up my hand calmly, gently. "Please," I said, "let me finish." He sank back into his chair, defeated before the explanation had fully landed. Others shifted uncomfortably, eyes darted to one another. No one knew whether to be shocked, embarrassed, or afraid. "I didn't reveal this earlier because it was unnecessary," I said, letting my voice fill the room with measured authority. "Because it wasn't about proving my worth. Tonight was meant to celebrate love, family, and my brother's happiness. But when mockery and arrogance dominate space, when people assume superiority without understanding, truth becomes essential. I let the weight of that statement settle over them." The senior manager, finally exhaling, leaned back slightly, relief mixed with nervousness in his posture. He had known the truth for days, but seeing it unfold in front of everyone, and so gracefully, was almost disarming. "I have given opportunities," I continued, scanning the room slowly, ensuring that each person felt the magnitude of what I was saying. "I have guided projects, approved promotions, mentored employees. Many of the people who laughed at me, who mocked me, owe the careers they so proudly flaunt to the decisions I made. And tonight, those decisions remain intact, because professionalism is stronger than arrogance." The whispers returned, louder now as reality sank in. Faces went pale. Some guests looked down, ashamed. Others tried to smile, a nervous, forced smile, hoping to disguise the embarrassment that now etched their features. The gold watchman's voice broke again. I didn't know. You did," I said softly but firmly, locking eyes with him. "You were in my office, you knew my name, you shook my hand. And yet, in this room, you laughed, you assumed, you judged." The silence returned, heavier than before. The room was a stage of stunned spectators, every emotion amplified: fear, disbelief, shame, awe. The weight of realization was tangible, almost physical. I stepped closer, deliberately, ensuring my presence dominated the space. "And yet," I said, letting my words slow deliberately, "I do not seek revenge tonight. I do not need to prove my authority with anger. That is the difference between arrogance and true power. True power does not boast, it observes, it waits, it acts when the moment is right." Heads nodded subtly, some in admiration, some in silent acknowledgement of the shift that had occurred. My brother's eyes were wide, pride and relief mingling on his face. The people who had once mocked me were now faced with their own assumptions, reflected back in a mirror of undeniable reality. I paused, letting the room absorb the enormity of what had been revealed. Then softly I added, "Let tonight be a lesson. Not just for those who mocked, but for everyone who believes appearances are proof of worth. They are not. Silence is not weakness, patience is not submission, and judgment without understanding is folly." The room was silent for several heartbeats. Then slowly, Almost reverently, applause began. Not loud, not raucous, but steady, respectful, acknowledging. Some people clapped for the truth revealed, others for the grace with which it had been delivered. The gold watchman sat in stunned silence, unable to clap. His world had shifted in an instant. The senior manager, finally able to relax, exhaled, a smile touching his face. He understood the lesson, and he understood the justice of it. Even in silence, he conveyed respect, gratitude, and relief. I smiled at my brother, who beamed back. The room, though stunned, now held a new energy. Respect replaced arrogance. Understanding replaced judgment, and the truth finally spoken had restored balance. "I am here to celebrate my brother," I concluded, my voice warm, steady, and filled with calm authority. "I am here because love matters. I am here because family matters. And tonight, as the laughter returns, let it be informed by respect. Let it be informed by awareness. And let it be a reminder that every person deserves to be seen for who they truly are." The hall erupted, not in the careless laughter of before, but in a controlled, appreciative acknowledgement of both the truth and the grace with which tea had been delivered. Faces that had once sneered were now humbled. Smiles returned, but different this time, sincere, reflective, and aware. The gold watchman's head hung low. He did not speak again that night. His arrogance had been dismantled silently, elegantly, irreversibly. I returned to my seat, sitting beside my brother. I reached out and held his hand briefly, a silent acknowledgement of both the victory and the justice that had been served. This night had been about more than engagement celebrations. It had been about truth, patience, and the quiet, undeniable power that commands respect not through volume, but through presence, wisdom, and grace. And in that moment, I understood fully, power is not in the mockery of others, but in letting the truth speak for itself. Calmly, patiently, inevitably, the engagement continued, the celebrations resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted forever, and as I watched the people who had once mocked me, I realized that justice, true justice, is neither loud nor vengeful. It is precise, inevitable, and unforgettable.